God wants to transform your life by changing your workplace experience. Hello, my name is Nate Belkstrom, and it's my pleasure to be with you on this Victory in the Workplace podcast. I was just thinking about the title of our ministry, and I can imagine there's a lot of people, in particular Christian people is who I'm talking about primarily, who would say yes and amen to victory in life with your family, with your children, at church, your days off, you're outside of the workplace life. But I think a lot of people are so separate in their thinking, and we'll have podcasts where we really do a deep dive into the subject of is work spiritual or is it secular. But I think just off the top of my head right now, there's a lot of people, when they think of victory in life, they either totally leave work out of that saying, or they think of victory in life, and then I'll go to work and just endure that till I can get out and it's time to go home. And then I start living victoriously. I've joked with Aaron recently and also with other people. We all know in America, in English-speaking countries, what a POW is, prisoner of war. I think that has another application to some of us, prisoner of work. Okay, what I thought I would do today is share my story with you. Everybody has a story, and as busy as life is, if you got time to sit down with someone and even hear a very short version of their story, everybody's story could pretty much end up being a movie. There's drama, there's hopefully not tragedy, although that sometimes is the case, but there's just significant milestones in everybody's lives that have brought us all to the point of who we are right now and why what we do right now is important to us. Here's my story. First of all, I was a PK. For those of you that are English speaking, that's short for preacher's kid. I wasn't born in church, but I sure felt like I was born in church. I was quite sickly as a child, missed a lot of school. And one thing I remember about that is that I would maybe often is a stretch, occasionally I would beg my parents, please, I'm sick, can I stay home from church? And they said, no, you're going to church and we're going to pray for you and pray that God heals you. So even when I was sick, I usually ended up going to church. Graduated from high school, went to business college, enjoyed it tremendously, but even then, I had this pull on my life that I had been prayed over and actually even told that I would be in ministry. And I interpreted that to be church ministry. Be a pastor, be a missionary. I don't want to be a missionary because I didn't like to fly, so I guess I settled in on being a pastor. Business college doesn't really train you, or at least it doesn't train you on the specifics of church ministry. So even though I really enjoyed it, I didn't graduate, came very close to graduating. In hindsight, of course, I wish I would have. But I stopped going to business college and met my wife somewhere in that process, Chris. And we have a very interesting background, both of us. My father was a pastor, a Pentecostal pastor, and my wife's family ran a circus. And I don't think I've ever met any two people that have the same sort of a family occupational background as Chris's family and my family. So we get married, go on a short honeymoon to the Black Hills of South Dakota, and then end up at Bible college in Dallas, Texas, called Christ for the Nations. And loved it, loved the warm weather, the climate, everything about it. My wife and I tell people, this was before the internet, we were 1,000 miles away from home, and that was during the time where if you made a long-distance call, it cost you quite a bit, and we were newlyweds, didn't have much money, so we didn't call home much, and we just figured it out, and it was good for us in that early newlywed stage of our life. And graduated from Bible college and got my degree to go into ministry. And there again, I'm defining ministry very narrowly, as unfortunately I think a lot of people still do. Ministry to me was be a pastor, be a children's minister, maybe be a missionary, but oh God, please don't send me to Africa. How many people have prayed a prayer like that? Sent out some applications, did some checking around. Nothing really opened up. So we moved back from Dallas to the wonderful state of Minnesota. And if you have never experienced snow, I got pictures of snow being, in some cases up to your waist and even beyond. But anyway, with global warming, we don't experience that quite so much anymore. We in Minnesota mostly, I think I'm speaking for the majority, we appreciate global warming, meaning Minnesota winters aren't quite as frigid as they used to be. Went back to our home church. We loved our church. It was a good church. That was fine. But I did not go back as a pastor. I went back as, what people call it a lot of times, a layman. How many times have you heard that there's two types of people in church? There's the clergy and there's the layman. As I've talked to other people, like in Romanian cultures, Polish cultures, different countries we've been, I don't think other cultures really use the term layman much, but if you've been around church life much in America, you've heard it. Did some study on the word layman. It comes from a Latin word which means to lay around and do nothing. So, pastors, I would encourage you, Christian, I would encourage you, don't use that word because it means to lay around and really do nothing. But I was perceived to be a layman in my church, although we got very active teaching children and do things like that. But my Monday through Saturday life, I went back to the same job I had before Bible college. It was a job in the hotel restaurant business. The name of the facility was called the Decathlon Athletic Club. And if you've been to Romania much, and I think other places in Europe too, there is a Decathlon sporting goods store. Don't know much about it, but our place was called the Decathlon Athletic Club. We were the busiest private athletic club in America. Which, that was pretty cool. That kind of helped you to be motivated every day, realizing you were part of something really special. As I tell the story, half of our business was to get people physically fit, the gymnasiums, the swimming, the volleyball, the racquetball, the tennis, the training, and all that goes into being physically fit. The other part of our business, the other half of it, was to fatten you up. We had multiple restaurants. We had catering facilities. Could handle several hundreds of people at one time for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, whatever people needed. We would either get you in shape or we could fatten you up or we could do both. And my job was to be banquet manager, and I started at the bottom, as you do mostly, especially when you're young in any job, and didn't take very long. And I was banquet manager, had a staff of 25 to 30 people, something like that. And we even stayed in touch. I tell you, God did something with that group of people. We built relationships. I know people overuse this term, especially in the sports world, in that song, We Are Family. We actually were a family. It was more than a job, and we got really close. And even years after leaving there, we still would have reunions. We haven't for a while now, but every year, every 2 years or so, we'd have a reunion. It was just like a high school class reunion. Worked with some amazing people. Do you know what I found out? One thing, having grown up in church, Christian culture, being around Christians a lot, and there are some amazing Christians, absolutely. But you know what? There are some amazing people that don't claim to be at least born-again Christian. Maybe they don't even claim to be Christian. In fact, I can say this, probably about the nicest person I worked with, if she wasn't agnostic or atheist, she was one of the two. And we just mentioned spiritual things a couple times to each other. And I don't remember specifics about what she said, but she definitely was not a religious, spiritual person as most of us would interpret that. But she was the nicest, kindest, funniest, enjoyable to work with person I think that I worked with that whole time. And I find that so interesting. It almost seems like an oxymoron. You think Christian, kind, gentle, loving, sincere, kind. And sometimes we are, but sometimes the world does a pretty good job of being that way too. So I'm at the Decathlon Club. My heart's for ministry. We just had a newborn baby child at that time and a beautiful little baby girl. Her name's Amy. We named her Amy Joy. And we often, if she heard it once, she probably heard it 1,000 times or more in her lifetime. Joyful Amy Joy is what we would call her. And she was a very joyful child. But my heart is to work in quote-unquote ministry. And even though it was a good job, decent salary, as I said already, enjoyed the people I work with, it felt like it was a spiritual wasteland. Literally, I saw little or no value spiritual value in my Monday through Saturday job. Sometimes we worked on Saturday, obviously, in the food service business, and maybe would have a Monday off and then work on a Saturday instead. So I can say Monday through Saturday. And I would get newsletters back before the internet. Yeah, isn't it amazing? Those of you that are a bit older, your children wonder, how in the world did people communicate before the internet? We just figured it out. It was slower, but we figured it out. And I had this one particular friend in school. His name's Blake. I have not seen him for years and years. I trust he's doing well. He was a great guy, good friend. But for comparison's sake, Blake went to Africa and became a missionary. And he would send out newsletters once a month. And in these newsletters, he would talk about people being spiritually helped, salvations, people being prayed for physical healing, getting healed, just ministry like we think of ministry in a church-type setting. I would read those newsletters. I would be happy for Blake. I'd be happy for the people that he ministered to in Africa. This is great, right? This is why we went to Bible college. But then for myself, just this deflated feeling. I know it was selfish. We're human and sometimes we're selfish. And I'm just like, God, how come my friend Blake and other people that I knew that went to Bible school who were in church ministry, how come they can be serving you and I can't? Except for a couple hours on Sunday, and we had a crisis center. I could tell stories about that. We were on what was called 14th and Nicollet Avenue in Minneapolis. It was the number one location for prostitution, drugs, and alcohol back at that time. In fact, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune did a story on it, as I recall. So our church was right across the street on this corner of 14th and Nicollet. And we had this crisis center, coffee shop type thing in the evenings. Wow, did we have some experiences, and were there some characters that walked through that door. And as much as possible, my wife and I scheduled for us to be there at least one weekend night, a Friday or a Saturday. That was ministry. That was fine. Sunday church, ministering to children or teaching like a Sunday school class, that was fine. But Monday through Saturday, getting up, going to work, serving a few hundred people at a business function or a wedding. We did lots of weddings, large weddings, the money people spent on weddings and bar mitzvahs. We were very close to a suburb called St. Louis Park. And there were a lot of Jewish people. That area was known for old Jewish money. And wow, did these people, some of them anyway, did they spend the money to have good parties? Wow, so deluxe, so fancy. All that stuff I did Monday through Saturday, I did not see any spiritual value in it. I only saw spiritual value in what I did at church, what I did at our crisis center outreach. But every year I would take my vacation and spend at least a week, if not the entire 2 weeks of the vacation time, going on mission trips. We would go to places like Puerto Rico, the Caribbean islands, beautiful places. In fact, the standard joke was everyone that comes to one of these beautiful tropical islands wants to live there, and everyone that lives there wants to leave because there was a lot of poverty and there wasn't a lot of opportunity. But we'd go to these places and we would have crusades, not as large as Billy Graham crusades like you'd see on television back in the day, but, a few thousand people would come, hundreds of children. One year my wife and I were in charge of children's ministry, and then during the day we'd go talk to people individually on the streets. It was wonderful. I absolutely loved it. That time goes by so fast. As anything that we really enjoy on planet Earth, it seems to go by just like that, doesn't it? And I remember the first day going back to work after one of these mission trips. I'd been at my job about 5 years at that time. 5 years worth of newsletters from Blake, and also staying in contact with other friends who had went to Bible school, who are now pastoring churches and doing all this spiritual stuff. I pulled my car over on the side of the road on the corner of Dodd and Pilot Knob. I think that's in the suburb of Rosemont. Might be Farmington if you are familiar with the Twin Cities. In Minneapolis, you may know the location. I pulled the car over. I wasn't crying on the outside. Maybe, I don't know. But I was sure crying on the inside. And I just stopped my car. I looked up to heaven. And I said, God, if you don't change my job and let me serve you, life is just not worth it. I don't think I would have done anything stupid like tried to hurt myself, but that's just the way I felt that day. God, if there's sin in my life, show me. I wasn't aware of any sin. If there was, I would have repented and changed it. There was nothing that I was aware of. But it seemed to me that God was preventing me from living a complete, fulfilled, abundant life of ministry, which is what I had trained for. I had the degree to prove I was trained for it. So I prayed that prayer. And as I like to say, God is so smart. God did not change my job, at least for probably about the next year and a half. I'll get more into that story down the road a bit. But what he began to do is he began to change me. See, there's a lot of us right now, and maybe you have a crisis in your marriage. Maybe you have a crisis financially, a crisis with physical health, or you're just unhappy in life. Nothing outwardly is bad, but on the inside, maybe you're even a Christian and you're just like, ugh, life stinks. It's not a case of God changing our spouse, usually. It's not a case of God changing our job, usually. Changing our church, that's usually not the issue. But most of the time when he begins to really work and take us to the next level, the change begins on the inside of us. Because we're the problem. Look in the mirror and we're looking at probably what the problem is, and we're looking at who can get the answer rolling in our lives. That's us. And don't remember a lot of details because it was quite a while ago, but I do remember I began to study the Bible. First of all, I'd go into Christian bookstores. And this was back in 1980-ish. Okay, I just dated myself, but you figure that out anyway. 1980-ish, I'd go in Christian bookstores. There'd be volumes, hundreds in some cases, if the store was big enough. Hundreds of books about Christian marriage and Christianity. My marriage was fine. We had our little issues, but we were fine. There'd be hundreds of books about Christianity and parenting. We had a little baby, and while we were going through growing stages along with our daughter, us growing as parents, there were no big problems. We were fine. But I tell you, when it came to work, I was desperate to begin to see work the way God sees it, but there was nothing. Literally, folks, I'm not evangelistically speaking. At that time, there was nothing about Christianity and work, at least in my world that I could see. So I began to do something that I probably should have done in the first place. I began to study the Bible. Found out there were about 500 verses, actually more than that now that I'm aware of, but let's just say 500 for a round number. There are about 500 verses on the subject of work. And most of the time work was mentioned in a very positive manner. Most of the time work was mentioned as something God is pleased with, that he gives us the blessing of being able to be involved with. We'll talk about that more down the road too. And my whole perspective, to use the spiritual term, the transformation of my mind, the transformation of my thinking began to take place. And I worked one more year, approximately, probably a little bit more than that, but one more year at my job as banquet manager at the Decathlon Club. That was, as I look back on it, that was probably organically the best year of my life. Because when I did become a pastor, and I pastored for a long time, and it was good, wonderful, loving people, mostly a great experience. I say mostly, okay? Of course, because life is not perfect. But there was one thing special and unique about that last year at the Decathlon Club. I wasn't an official pastor, although I had begun to pastor my staff to the best of my ability. When I say pastor my staff, I really cared about them. Yeah, I generically could say, I love you guys. But no, this was a heart thing that last year. And I really began to listen to them. The average person listens to someone for 17 seconds and then they mentally check out. I'm still growing in that, but I begin to get... I remember one time it was during a lull at work, and this lady's just going through multiple crises in her life, and I think I just stood there and listened to her. I don't know if it was an hour and a half, and our relationship was just so tight, and she so appreciated me, mainly just listening to her. When people on my staff had sick relatives in the hospital, what's a pastor do? Likely, especially if it's not a mega church, he'll go to the hospital and he'll visit and pray for the sick relative. I did the same thing, went to the hospital to visit relatives of people that were part of my staff. And that year, again, it was so organic. Organic food is so popular. You walk into the store and it seems like sometimes almost half the products in there anymore are organic. That year of ministry at my job, I was not being paid to be a pastor. I was not being paid to be spiritual. I was doing it just because I had a heart for God and he gave me a heart for these people. Whereas once I started pastoring, of course, you still love people, but then it's your job. You're the pastor. You're supposed to love these people. You're supposed to pray for them when they're sick and that type of thing. But that last year I had at my job, nobody was telling me, you're supposed to do this. It was coming from the heart because I wanted to do it, because I was beginning to see that work is spiritual. And if you'll think about work the way the Bible describes work, you can have victory in the workplace. So we'll be coming to you on these Victory in the Workplace podcasts twice a month. The plan is first and third Monday of every month. And sometimes we'll do interviews. Sometimes like today, you'll just get me. But I tell you, if you'll tune in and give it a little bit of time, you'll find out that God wants to transform your life by changing your workplace experience. He did it for me. He wants to do it for you. Be blessed.